I'm Misha. And that's Nicole.
Hi.
And we are Ritual Común. Nicole is not into it today. And this is Ninja. And that's Luna.
Poor Ninja.
And we are Ritual Común.
Listen for my how.
Today we're going to be talking about personal wounds and trauma.
As we smile.
Yes. So we're talking about personal wounds and trauma.
So personal wounds and trauma. Let's talk a little bit now about what is trauma.
Yeah. So trauma can look a variety of different ways. I think most of the time when we think about trauma, we think about like domestic violence or these kinds of trauma that can have really deep emotional wounds. But trauma can be like you going through a disaster, like a natural disaster. There was an earthquake or a hurricane, anything like that.
Catastrophic disaster.
Yeah, an accident, or sometimes it could be medical procedures that went wrong and just leave you scarred for life, right? It can look a myriad different ways. You could have been mugged on the street. You could have had, the domestic violence part. It could have been a death in your family. It could be a relationship that you were in.
Something that essentially marks you to your very core.
Yes.
That's the point of trauma, I would say.
Yes. And the other part of trauma is that if you have had any of these really deep emotional wounds during childhood or early in life, you are going to be more susceptible to suffering more trauma in the future. And I know that doesn't sound very hopeful, but it's not that you're just going to attract all these negative things to yourself. It's just that a lot of the factors that help us deal with a lot of really big stresses and surprises and traumas in our life, all of that cushioning, all of those protective factors happen most of the time in our early life. Yeah. And so then if you didn't have that cushion in early life, and then you get to be older, you have your first boyfriend, and it ends up horribly, or girlfriend, yeah, or I don't know, whatever
you want.
And it ends up horribly. That can add to your trauma, so it's additive. And all of a sudden, we have this like huge can of worms that we have to sort through, in order for us to fare better in our future.
Personal wounds and the idea of spirituality behind trauma and behind personal scarring, or core scarring as we call it, would be something that is, shakes you, right? It feels like your life is totally out of whack. It feels like every time it comes up, you just don't even want to deal with it. It's a super block. Now, and you can check out our videos on blocks and triggers, but oftentimes you will definitely go to a place of being triggered from this trauma that is now re-entering your life. And you're going to feel like your whole world is flipping upside down. Your ground is shaking. You're just like, what the effing hell is going on with me now? And a lot of times you react in such a way that you either bottle up or you get really aggressive, or just you have a myriad of ways of reaction.
Or you can avoid, right? You can completely numb out. You can be really reactive. There's like a range of how you can act out. You can act out sexually. You can act out with friends, like partying. All these different things can happen.
Yeah. That
if you are in the more active state, can put you in more danger. If you're more in the avoidant stage, your emotions are not going to be recognized by others, so you're less likely to get help because no one knows what's going on with you.
And in your spirit, we're going to talk about just what are the effects, like what happens when something like this actually shakes you to your core, and you have such a heavy memory or such a heavy action that is brought on to you that you almost imprint it. So 2 things here. The first thing is that it actually gets imprinted into your body. So often people with trauma find that they have physical pain, or it is stored in a specific place by Ninja. It is stored in a specific place in your body. Ninja's like,
Ninja's out of it.
Yeah. Sorry, Ninja. And what we found is that when Nicole and I first started doing yoga together, this was a time of grief in her life and a type of grief for me too, because I was going through my divorce. We found that we connected really well through trauma yoga. And what we ended up doing is finding a class that had and specialized in trauma yoga.
It was Shakti. It was Shakti yoga.
And the girl that ran the classes for us was a survivor of trauma, and she had she had a lot of things that she had gone through, and she now brought this practice to everybody to sort of focus on areas of trauma that are stored in your body, and how to sort of do a meditative asana. You can look at the types of meditation videos that we have. And that showed us how to move through whatever blockage or whatever trauma we had stored in our bodies. And we started to understand that was kind of the wake-up call for both of us. Like, these things that we've gone through are still here. And they're actually stored in these spaces in our bodies.
And it's because we're not externalizing it, right? So one of the interesting things that happens when you have gone through anything that's traumatic is that your brain physically changes, right? A lot of things change, but your brain physically changes. And when you're not aware of your triggers and blocks and things like that, and something reminds you or anything just kind of pops up that puts you back in that place, you're no longer functioning from your executive functioning, right? Or rational thoughts. You're expressing yourself and acting from a place of this visceral emotion, right? That you may not know how to direct. So it can show up as anger and all these like really intense emotions that we can't verbalize sometimes. And so what happens there is that now you're in this mindset. You only know that you're feeling horrible. You can't deal with it. And you also can't rationalize it for yourself. And so it just builds up and it becomes, it gets stored all over your body. And like one of the things that people might not know about serotonin is that serotonin actually lives in our stomach. So a lot of the times when you see people with depression or trauma or anything that will affect serotonin, they complain a lot about their stomach issues. Their stomach hurts, they're not going to the bathroom, all these things can happen with your stomach. And it's because all of that is out of whack and your body is just seizing up. Like you need to let these things out, right?
Yeah. Oftentimes we find that we have reactions. And when we have these reactions to things, we have no idea even where they came from or why they've happened. And one of the things that we found really interesting is that working with a lot of people, and I do past life regressions, sometimes the traumas that you feel are reoccurring from other lifetimes. And so sometimes, and this is really interesting to me because when I go through a past life regression, there will be someone who has been through some domestic abuse trauma in this lifetime now, and they will have recollected it. When they go into a past life regression, they will recollect this happening over and over and over in multiple lifetimes. And what happens is that it's almost as if you are sort of like born into a life with like a lot of grit, right? Like a pearl. And every time that you're being damaged, you're becoming thinner and thinner and thinner until at one point, if you still haven't dealt with the trauma or if you haven't released it or forgiven it or allowed it to leave your body, you become so very thinly sort of placed in this feeling between the thing that's happening and you receiving it, that when it's sort of even touching you even ever so slightly, because you have so much built up, you crack. And it's so incredibly sensitive to some people, whereas other people can deal with the exact same kind of trauma and have so much more resilience. And that has a number of factors to do with like family and society and the protective nature.
Yeah. So, and I think what you said is really interesting because one, in the spiritual aspect, how can you work through something that you're not aware of, right? Like most of us maybe never even thought about doing a past life regression because it's not something that's common in our society. Like your doctor isn't going to be like, go to a practitioner and get a past life regression because I don't know what's going on with you. Yeah. That doesn't happen for us, right? So if you do walk down that line, it's so eye-opening because you're like, oh my gosh, like this explains so much. Because a lot of the times you will see people that have reacted to something like an accident or getting stuck in an elevator or something like that. And they have this just crazy reaction to it that, yes, of course, that is unfortunate and could be traumatic if you had all these things, but maybe their lives were pretty good. And then this one thing happens and it just breaks them apart.
It shatters them.
Yes. And what you're saying about like being brittle with trauma that you are aware of, like say that you know that you saw a murder or something like that, right? Yeah. You might put up these really rigid boundaries. Like you might not go out at night. You don't want to have a big circle of friends. Like you put these really rigid boundaries. And what happens when our boundaries are not flexible is that the littlest thing, like a little rock, can come and just shatter our world, right? And you just never know what that person's been through.
Right.
And I think sometimes you will see people go through very similar events and they react very, very differently, like Misha was saying. And that is because of the protective factors, right? Like maybe they had family or friends or mentors that listened to them, that allowed them to speak out and heard and validated their emotions. Or they could have had things in their lives that were really tough, where they didn't feel safe enough to emote or express themselves. How do you deal with all these like trauma and wounds and things that can be happening to you?
Right. So one of the best ways that you can deal with this is, number one, identify what's happening to you. If you can at least identify situationally, these are the things that are happening around me, or every time I go into this type of situation, I'm understanding that I'm dealing with some kind of major traumatic effect that is happening to my body. Identify it, write it down. It's not normal because you know it makes you feel out of whack. So that means for yourself, it's something that you can at least identify and be aware of. And then you can share that with somebody that you love, share that with a professional, or even just going into that exact feeling and that identifying where it comes from. What is the source of it? What is the root of it?
Yeah, and also books can be really helpful. There's a book by, his last name is Vanderkolk, it's Kolk, I believe. He does a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's really helpful because it really breaks down the way that trauma gets stored in the body. A lot of the times we're not aware that we've gone through trauma because that's the life we've always known. And then later on in our life, we start to realize there's all these things, like we have an anger issue, we have all these things going on, right? Yeah. And I think the first way to begin your journey into healing is being aware and also accepting that something traumatic happened to you, that whatever happened to you was not right. Yeah. That you didn't deserve it, that it's not normal, and just sitting with that, because there's a lot of shame surrounding that. So if you're able to just accept the fact that you did go through a trauma, it can be really helpful for people. And there are so many resources. There's online forums, there's blogs, there's a community of people who are healing, and being able to relate to others that are in the same boat, that know how you're feeling, is really, really helpful.
And lastly, just remember, you are not what happened to you. Right? That does not define you. You experience something, and that experience moves through you. So now you are marked by it, but it does not make you who you are now.
Yeah. And you can always change the story, right? We have built stories around these things that happen to us, and we often tend to not be so nice to ourselves. And I think part of that healing process is learning to rewrite that story about ourselves in a way that makes us the hero, right? Makes us the strong person.
You guys, this video is gonna make me cry. Okay, we hope you like this video. Give it a big thumbs up. We love you guys. We hope you guys are well, stay well, and comment on the comment box below whatever you want to tell us.
Okay, bye. If you like what you hear and you want to keep the conversation going, listen to our podcast, Ritual Común Contigo.
Also check out our Instagram, where we have affirmations, oracle cards, and give a special message just for you.
Make sure to check out our website,
ritualcomún.com.
Inhala,
Exhala. Inhala, exhala.